All right, so we're recording now. Um, I guess we'll start. Thank you for coming on. Your name is Isabella, correct?
Yes, Isabella.
All right. And you're from Monterrey down in Mexico.
Yes.
Give everybody I guess a quick overview of you and what you do and all that.
Well, I am a law student in Mexico. I'm very passionate about history, culture. I love languages in general. So everything that has to do with community, with how society works, I absolutely adore all of that aspect of humanity. And particularly, well, Monterrey is one of the biggest cities in Mexico. We're three main cities, which is Mexico City, which is the capital,
Mhm.
Guadalajara, which is one of the most culturally enriching cities in all of Mexico, and Monterrey. We are what most consider the economic capital because
Mhm.
most businesses have grown out or have started in Monterrey that are of national reach in Mexico. We're far north, very close to the United States, about 2 hours away from the frontier in car. So
Okay.
most of us speak a mix of Spanish and English. A lot of people say we speak a lot of Spanglish here.
Yep.
And that's basically a brief and very fast overview of the context.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and let you know right now for you and any other Hispanic viewers or listeners that watch this. I don't know Spanish at all, so I will probably butcher some of the words that I attempt, and
Don't
my
worry, I
apologies.
might butcher words in English, so we're even.
All right, so we'll be good there. But I was looking, one of the things I was looking at, because like you said, I did see that Monterey was the one of the most developed cities down there in Mexico, and definitely has the what was it the economy. I think it was number one in the economy that you guys had. But one of the things that intrigued me for sure that I wanted to talk to you about was you spoke of the Jewish community down there,
Yes.
which up here, in America, like when we watch TV and movies and everything, and if it's anywhere related down there in South America or Mexico, if it's Hispanic at all, we're always shown if religion's mentioned, the Catholic aspect of it. Nothing, I mean, it makes sense that there are others, obviously, but it's not really what's spoken about up here. So that definitely intrigued me for sure. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, of course, and it actually has to do a lot with the history of my city because, well, we all know that Mexico used to be Spain's colony. So it started as New Mexico. Well, no, as New Spain. Nueva España was the colony name. It included Texas. It included a lot of parts of what are right now United States, and
Mhm.
all the way through to Central America and a lot of colonies further below in South America.
Mhm.
So the thing is, around the early years of the colony, a lot of people who migrated were actually Jewish, particularly Jewish Sephardis. I don't know how to pronounce that correctly in English, but there's different according to where the community of Jewish people comes from, their names. So usually we hear of Sephardi Jewish when we're talking about like this Ibero Peninsula, which is Spain, Portugal, all of that, or the Ashkenazi Jewish, which are more from the Polish, German side. So it
Yeah.
depends on the community, right? And here in Monterrey currently, it's expected that around 1 in every 10 people living here have their ascendancy of Sephardi Jewish. So it's a lot of the community. And
Yeah.
recently we started seeing a spike of people who identify as such because Spain started granting or recognizing the nationality of all these Sephardi Jewish descendants who were
Okay.
expelled from Spain. So a
Hmm.
lot of them were escaping the Spanish Inquisition when they came over to
Yeah.
Mexico. However, Mexico was still part of Spain. So in here we also had the Inquisition, just that a lot of them held this, they still continue to practice in secret. And for example, one of the people who helped build the original boats, Maria la Pinta, La Santa Maria, which Columbus
Yeah.
came to America and discovered the Americas with, was actually Jewish. He was traveled in the Spanish Inquisition.
Okay.
So the first founding fathers of the city of Monterrey, who were granted land, were of Jewish origin.
Hmm.
However, they started practicing the Catholic religion to disguise their Jewish
Yeah.
origin, to not be followed by the Spanish Inquisition. And that's why a lot of these aspects have been forgotten, because right now, Nuevo León, the whole area, is actually quite Catholic, and we're very Catholic practicing because the family started to teach their children and all the close knit community to practice the Catholic religion to avoid this persecution and possible
Yeah.
death, right? Um, so what happens in Monterrey is that even though the religion that started being practiced most was Catholic, most
Mm.
of our roots can be traced back to the Jewish origin. So a lot of our traditions, or a lot of our food is of Jewish origin, and a lot of people from here from Monterrey don't actually know that. For
Mm.
example, tortillas, right? Mexican
Okay.
tortillas, tacos. You usually, when you imagine the tortilla, you imagine made of like corn,
Corn or
basically.
flour? Yeah.
The flour one is from us, from Monterrey, from the northern area, which is basically bread without yeast, which is
Yeah.
a Jewish plate. Which
I prefer the flour ones better anyways.
exactly, they're very good, but it essentially came to be because Mexico used to eat a lot of tortillas, and when this Jewish culture comes here and they want to become a part of this Mexican culture, well, in the moment Spanish colony culture, they started adapting their plates to what usually could be eaten here. So that's how the flour
Yeah.
tortilla is born. Or for example, most of Mexico, like if you go to Sonora, if you go to other areas, what they eat heavily is cow meat, right?
Hmm.
We also eat a lot of cow meat. We love our carnes asadas, which is basically
Yeah.
barbecues.
Yep. I was looking at that.
Yes, we're very fans of that. But our like cultural dish is cabrito, which is
That's
kind of
the
more
goat.
like, yes, more
Yes,
like
I look at
goat,
that.
which
Yes.
is also a very heavily inspired Jewish tradition.
Okay.
So our city, actually, it is thought that it's socially developed differently from other cities in Mexico, and why it had its very high and fast development within the industrial aspect
Yeah.
was because of all of these Jewish traditions. We know Jewish people to be very hard workers, very dedicated, very passionate, and the city is heavily involved. The three main founding fathers were um, of Jewish Sephardis, and right now all this history is being undercovered, which wasn't before.
Yeah. That,
So
okay.
that's kind of like the intro,
Yeah.
I think. More like questions could go now.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I was looking at, because you brought up and again, my apologies for butchering the language.
Hmm.
Um, uncovering a lot of things, and with the food, the carne asada, and I'm not even gonna try and pronounce the goat thing. But I did look into that, and that it look. I had a picture pulled up. It looks delicious, that's for sure. Um, but one of the things, I think it was more of the holiday towards Hanukkah. It was like a fried bread cheese thing.
A fried bread cheese thing.
Yeah, I
Do
might
you
be
have the
wrong.
name?
I was not able to. I found it when I was at work. I was not able to find it again while I got home.
Or if you send the picture, maybe I know what you're talking about.
Okay, well, we'll try that later on afterwards. And but one of the things I did find, because you were talking about, they're uncovering a lot of the old traditions, a lot of the old history. I was looking into the indigenous history, if you know anything about that, and something about and again, I'm probably wrong here.
Yes.
Well, my wife said it's probably pronounced Kikimecas.
Chichimecas.
Oh, see, I was right. I told her
Yes.
Chichi as well, and she said it's probably not right to say Kiki.
No,
Um,
it's actually chichimecas. They're,
yes.
well, they are a lot from Nuevo León and Coahuila. So Nuevo León and Coahuila a long time ago with Texas used to be like a single state, right?
Okay.
So chichimecas actually traveled a lot through the mountains. Well, they're not really mountains, more like small valleys, and the mountains are in Nuevo León, but there's kind of like small hills between Coahuila and
Okay.
Nuevo León. And so they used to travel in that area. They were kind of nomadic of nature, but not of very big parcels of land like other
Yeah.
indigenous groups in Mexico that used to travel very long distances. Chichimecas didn't really bother with that. They usually stayed in the Sierra Madre, which is the big mountains that we have here in Nuevo León. Um, they were natives to the region. Actually, there's not a lot of information about them
Yeah.
because the area, particularly where cities developed in here in Coahuila and Nuevo León, is very desertic. So, like, it's very desert, it's very dry. It's not very easy to cultivate or to create like
Yeah.
a sedentary, I think it's a word in English, a sedentary lifestyle.
I got you.
But the first settlers did actually have this meeting of cultures, right, with the Chichimecas. And the thing with Mexico in general, with the mixture of cultures, is that we used to have a really marked race division. It's still, you can still see social issues regarding from that. But for example, if you were from Spain and you were born in Spain and you came to Mexico to live in La Nueva España, because Mexico didn't exist yet, you were considered a peninsular. So you come from the peninsula.
Okay.
And you had like a higher social economical status above other people. And then if you
All right.
were from Spanish parents who were peninsulares, but you were born in Nueva España, you were considered castizo. So you were already like a social level below that. And then if you were a mixture between indigenous and castizo, you were mestizo. So you were even lower than that. And to the very bottom, there were the indigenous people in this social
Yeah.
structure of the colony, which I think happened in a lot of countries, but especially in Mexico, it was very ingrained with a mixture of cultures. Because as far as I understand, I might be wrong. In the United States, was more of like a pushing aside the Native Americans and then building your own societies within the communities. And in Mexico, we had a lot of mixing. Still, there were the
Mm-hmm.
communities, but it was thought also that it was a better way to like evangelize
Yeah.
by making them become part of the family. But it still was very marked the difference, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So going back to what I was speaking originally about, the Chichimecas were a very territorial kind of nomadistic lifestyle.
Yeah.
So they used to travel this sparse of land, which other cultures, other indigenous cultures knew it was theirs, but didn't really have this involvement. It was a later group of indigenous, because I think people usually, when they hear of indigenous groups in Mexico, they think they're all in the same time period historically,
Yeah.
when it's
I know.
not
I
really
probably would
like
be.
that. There
Yeah.
was kind of like an evolution, like Olmecs and Toltecs are some of the most ancient cultures, and then the Aztecs, and those were later, and Chichimecas were one of like the latest groups.
Mm-hmm.
So it was they didn't have like this complex urban creations such as the Aztecs used to have, right? Like we have the
Yeah.
big city of Tenochtitlan, which is now Mexico City.
Yes.
They
Yes.
didn't have this. They had more like caves and paintings and hollowed stones and spearheads, more like what one would think traditional indigenous groups to have.
Yeah.
And but really, the settlers pushed them aside when they created their communities, especially because they were trying to protect themselves from all of this context of the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah.
So they were trying to make like their own cities protected from outsiders in general, to the point and to which we historically still are known as, um, to have very close knit communities. It's very hard for people who are foreigners to actually belong in the society of what today is Monterrey. Like right now, not as much, but it's still very ingrained within the culture to be a very close knit community.
Yeah.
Actually, Monterrey is it has a lot of municipalities or small towns around it.
Okay.
So if you see a picture of Monterrey, you will see like this big sparse of land, which is a huge city. But it's actually many cities come together. So you have San Pedro, you have Monterrey, you have Santiago, which is a little further away. You have Garcia, you have Santa Catarina, but Monterrey is the main city in the very center.
Okay.
Actually, I believe the first city near this area in Nuevo León, if I correctly recall, it was Allende, I think, which is closer to a river, which,
Okay.
I mean, it's kind of logical, historically speaking, that closer to the river,
Yeah.
it's where people would settle, and they
Yeah.
consider themselves the first settlers in Nuevo León. But Monterrey, which is currently the capital, is where a lot of the community grew. And further, for example, right now, if you go to Monterrey, they still have a synagogue. They still have a very close-knit people who still follow the Jewish tradition, but they're a minority right now when we all come from those groups of people.
Yeah, one of the things I was looking into, especially when you told me about the whole um, Jewish community down there and all that. Another thing I think that, at least for me, when I think of, because I think most of Americans have at least heard of the words Spanish Inquisition, but anytime I'm always thinking of it, I'm thinking of, over there in Europe. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not thinking of on my side of the world, right? So I looked, that was one of the things that popped up, like the Spanish Inquisition down there in Mexico. I'm like, whoa, what is this? Um, and one of the things that caught me off guard, and I sent it to my wife, and we were like, whoa, was one of, I guess, because like you said, they were trying to hide and trying to conform to continue their faith, inside their homes and whatnot. So out and about, they would, portray being Catholic and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that they would, I guess, accuse or find supposed Jewish people and, do what the Inquisition did,
Mm-hmm.
was, and the weird one was, if you bathed on a Friday and put on clean clothes, you were late. That was like cause for concern for them, and you were, captured, tortured, and every, all that stuff. And that just caught me off guard. I was like, that lets
Mm-hmm.
you, like, is there a history or not a history, like a
Well,
reason for why
it's
they
kind of
would consider
related to
that
the
being Jewish?
Shabbat. Like, it's kind of related to the Shabbat. We know that Jewish people in the Shabbat, they usually, it's a day of rest, right? So
Okay.
usually there's no work. I don't know if you've seen, there's a very, very good, I don't remember if it's a movie or a series because I saw it in one sitting. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a series called Unorthodox on Netflix. I mean, it's from a completely European perspective, but it's a very conservative Jewish tradition displayed and shown on TV in a way that I think wasn't really seen before. Usually, when we see Jewish culture or things related in Jewish culture in like mainstream media, it has to do with World War II. And this
Yes.
one is more modern view of a Jewish community, an Orthodox Jewish community. I believe it was in New York, and then this girl who's from this very conservative Jewish community goes to live to Europe and sees like this whole other side of what it implies to be yourself, no?
Yeah.
And how the Shabbat is portrayed is this is a day of rest, and
Mm-hmm.
usually it has a lot to do with purity and keeping yourself pure and stuff like that. So how this is usually portrayed from Friday to Saturday, the Shabbat, every single week, it was kind of like this Jewish tradition that it was very ingrained. So even if you were no longer practicing the Jewish tradition, maybe you already had the custom of bathing yourself on Fridays
Yeah.
and like keeping clean and stuff like that. So it was very ingrained within the community, even if they didn't
Okay.
say it as something um, outwardly Jewish, and like you didn't
Yeah.
have all of these elements that would relate you to being Jewish. There's this
Mm-hmm.
small practices that you keep in your day-to-day life that you don't really think like, oh, this is because we belong to this certain community.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, because like nowadays, with like, yeah, of course you're gonna bathe and then put on clean clothes, not
Yeah,
just
like right
Friday,
now it's
every
super
day.
common to bathing every single day, especially
Yeah.
because we have plumbing. But
Yeah.
like back in the
So
day, to have a shower or to bathe yourself, well, you had to bring water from the river and prepare things like that. So it was different practices, especially because considering that, well, Spanish people, especially like all Latin emanating people, so like French people, Spanish people, all of those cultures, Portugal, they didn't have this custom of actually bathing every day. It's just something not very Latin for saying.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't really
I'm
have
reading
another
that
word.
all this was that back in the 1500s. So yeah, I'm pretty sure there was quite a few people that weren't bathing every day like we do. That's for sure.
Hmm.
Um, but one of the things I was looking into coming back to the modern day of what we have now down there in Monterey is y'all are, I think it said number three, like one of your biggest economies or manufacturers, you got a big steel producing thing down there that there's a lot of
Yes,
like, and then y'all apparently famous for your beer.
we're very famous for our beard. It's worldwide known.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't like beer, so that's not something I know. But I looked into that because I was like, what is Monterey famous for? And one of the things that popped up was their beer, and I was like, okay, like I'm thinking Modelo or Dos Equis, and it was Tecate.
Tecate, yes.
Okay, okay, boom, I'm good. I'm not that bad at it. Um, So yeah, I was looking at your steel production is apparently really, really a driving force in your economy there. Your
Well, it
beer,
used to be more than it is right now. The
yes,
beer
yeah,
definitely is steel. The steel used to be around what I think 100 years back, around
yeah, mm,
160 kind of years back. We have this very big place called Fundidora, which literally translates to like the place where you melt, like the
okay,
melting place.
yeah,
And right now it's a park, like
really.
because
Oh,
the
yeah, I saw
Mhm.
that. You can like
It's
zip
a
line and
huge,
everything through it.
beautiful park, and
Yeah, I want to
the
go.
currently where we had the how do you call it in English? I think it's furnace. A furnace, so like
Furnace?
where you melt, like
Yeah, furnace. Yeah.
a furnace. Right now, the biggest one, which was furnace number 3 or horno tres, how we know it in Spanish. It's actually a museum, an interactive museum. So you can go inside and actually see the melting pots and like where
Yeah.
people used to blow the fire. And that's one of the leading things that made the economy in Monterrey boom to the level
Yeah.
it went. Right now, it's currently out of business completely. We no longer melt
Yeah.
things here, but we do have a lot of factories, and it was one of the reasons why a lot of families in Monterrey became very wealthy and thus began other industries such as the beer industry, which we're very famous for. We have Cervecería Cuauhtémoc, we have Modelo, we have currently Heineken has offices here
Really?
in Mexico, and we're the ones who bottle their beers for
Okay.
all the American distribution. Um, so we have that, which is pretty amazing. Actually, there's a street, if you go through it, called Cuauhtémoc, like from Cervecería Cuauhtémoc.
Okay.
Cervecería means like beer brewing place, um, I think. So if you go through that street, just like at the very end, where middle up like the center of the city, downtown the city is meeting outskirts of the city, you
Mhm.
actually go through the brewing places. So you see these huge things that are brewing beer all day long. Actually, there was
Oh,
a crisis right now with coronavirus and all that because
yeah.
all the business had to stop for a time. So a lot of beer companies said like, okay, we'll stop delivering beers to convenience stores because we're not producing it, right?
Yeah.
And so the day they ordered that they were already delivering again all types of alcohol, but particularly beer, there were mile-long queues of people to like
Really?
buy beer because here it's like tequila is from Jalisco, from Guadalajara. Like
Okay.
Mexico is generally known for tequila, but that's
Yes.
like further in the center, like near Guadalajara. Actually, there's a town called Tequila, Jalisco. That's where tequila comes from.
Okay.
Um, and like Mexico City has more like mezcal, which is essentially
Yeah.
tequila, just not from Jalisco. And we have beer.
And they were just ready for to get some of that beer, huh?
And we also have very good mineral water, which we're also
Oh, really?
famous for.
Okay. Yeah, that was one thing. They'll have that mile long, like man-made river.
Oh yes, Santa
That
Lucia
you just, yeah,
within the
yeah,
Fundidora Park.
yeah. And I'm looking at another picture right here. It's a building. It's next to a tall building, but it looks like an egg on its side.
I think that is Pabellón M. It's
Huh?
like Pavilion. That's a show center. It's actually very new, like 5 years, 6 years ago it opened, but
Okay.
it's one of the biggest venues to go. For example, we just recently had a production of Cats, the musical,
Yeah.
with
Okay.
like internationally known singers and very big concerts holding there. Actually, Fundidora, where the place where we used to melt all this steel and all this sort of heavy metals. Right now, it's very well known for having international music festivals.
Really?
So actually, right now we're very depressed because Pal Norte got canceled, which is one of the biggest because of coronavirus.
Hmm. Hmm.
But we have huge artists coming. We had Billie Eilish. We've had
Yeah.
all sorts of famous people from around the, like, it's the equivalent to Coachella, but over here.
Yeah. I got you.
Like
I got
in
you.
all aspects.
All right. Well, that's really cool. I mean, I'm gonna take some of these photos and put them in the video so it'll pop up so people know like the hell is
What
he
we're
talking about?
talking about.
Yeah, like an egg building. What does this guy mean? Like you'll see it. They'll be in there. Don't worry. Um, but so if correct me if I'm wrong, because I might have heard you wrong. You said you're studying law.
Yes,
Okay. So if you don't mind,
I don't mind at all.
all right. What what got you into doing law? Like what? I'm assuming that's a driving force to something has to push you that way to
That's a
go into a
wonderful
very
question
tough
because I love
profession
my
like that.
career.
Okay.
So actually, studying law is very different. Studying law in Mexico than studying law in the United States, because
Hmm.
in the United States you have to go to college and then pursue a law degree.
Okay.
Um, Going to law school in Mexico is just after high school.
Okay.
So also like medical school in Mexico is also like a whole career. You don't go to college for that. You go directly to medical school. So it's a choice. Like instead of doing a history major, because we don't have majors or minors here, we have like directly bachelor's degrees. So
Okay.
the school system is very different.
Yeah.
And what's something that drives me a lot is human rights, like particularly very specifically human rights. So that has been my passion like forever. I love cultures and I love history, and I've always participated in MUN debates, international debates. I've been to Dallas, I've been to Harvard University, I've been to
Okay.
Paris, France to debate. Um, and it was such sort of like a natural decision for me saying, well, I want to become a lawyer, I want to study law, because I've always loved to argue. I've always loved talking. I almost never shut up.
Yeah.
And it's it has to do a lot with how people behave and how society responds to things. Like, why do we obey most of the time general laws? Like, there's very strict laws, like you will not commit homicide, you will not kill people, and that's
Yeah.
something very logic most people usually follow through.
Correct.
But there's also like, why would a person run a red light but not murder someone if those are rules created by the same community, right?
Yes.
And all of that study of how humanity works and how society works and having just a fairer world and a more just system is what drives me behind. So that's it's kind of like the concise way of stating it.
No, I agree with all that. Because I know up here with everything going around, I have talks with friends about certain stuff, and you know, I'm sure I don't know if y'all like watch the news of what's going on up in our neck of the
I'm
woods.
very aware of what's going on in the United States, yes. No, it's actually pretty
But
interesting because the law system in the United States is based on common law, right? Like all your system comes from England, so you have all these
yeah,
precedents, and the courts play this very important key role in how you understand the rules of society. And you're also divided in like you're also federation, we're also federation. So even though our systems are kind of similar, we have civil Roman law. So all of our system is kind of based from France. We are more based on the written law than on what the judges say. So for us, the priority is what's written down more than the precedent,
mhm,
which is very confusing sometimes when you're comparing how both systems work, because they're naturally born from different places. Ours is more French and yours is more British in the sort of, which is logical, of course, because of how both countries were created. But
Yeah.
a lot of Mexico was inspired. It was first the United States independence movement and then the French Revolution. So Mexico, when we got our independence, was 1810. It's when it started, and we got it in 1821.
Hmm.
And a lot of the values that we recollected were both from the American independence movement, but also from the French Revolution. So we mixed them up when the French kind of tried to create their own system, inspiring themselves a little bit on the American independence movement because it was the first one. And so, for example, when we see the United States, we know the United States of America as a whole, right? And it's a whole issue because everyone in America is always angry when they say, like, we're Americans. It's like, we're all Americans. You're the United States and all that fight, right? But it's
Yep.
also funny because actually, Mexico, the official name of the country, is the United States of Mexico.
Really?
Yes, and a lot of people do not know that
I
because
learned
we're
something else
also
today.
federation.
Wow,
So
I did not know that.
So how you have like your state laws, we also have our state laws, which is something that doesn't happen in other European countries, which have
Yeah.
regions but have like the central government, right? So for example, if you go the very typical way of saying it, how for example gay marriage in the United States was also a state thing. It's also a state thing here, and people see it like other countries see it very weirdly because they say like, well, it's a country thing, right? Like how could you get married in, I don't know, New York but not in Texas? I mean, I know
Yeah.
right now the Supreme Court already ruled it over and everything, but it's
Hmm.
the same in Mexico. Like, why could you get married in Mexico City but not in Nuevo León or not
Yeah.
in another state? And so, seeing, we usually do study a lot of the social issues going on in the United States, such as the Black Lives Movement that you have right now, or everything that's happening with people, for example, denying to wear a face mask. Exactly. So all of the social changes are very relevant because we kind of work in a similar way. So they are a lot of case studies that we use to understand how the system works as a general from an outsider's perspective and then from the insider's perspective as the Mexican example, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that I never thought of it that way. I mean, I don't really think of anything Mexican besides food every now and then. But
People usually see Mexico and they're like Cinco de Mayo.
either that, yeah, for sure. That's interesting though, for real. So, okay, if we're gonna, I kind of want to stay on this topic if that's all right.
Yeah, of
And
course.
probably while everyone who was watching was like, oh yeah, he's talking about food and cool tourist spots. Yeah, I can stick around for that. Oh crap, now we're going to talk about the differences of Mexico and America. Oh, I'm getting out now. So, but it's stuff I love to learn. Um, with that, since you said you've been up in the States, with various debates and all that, and studying law, I'm sure, just like you just said, you'll look at what we do, compare it with what you guys do, and try to, I'm assuming, find a common ground possibly. What would you say? Two questions. First one, what would you say in terms of law is one of the biggest similarities?
Oh, well, I think the biggest similarities in law, there's actually not many. I think the evolution of law in itself, it's very similar because Mexico just loves, like, we do have our own institutions, but it loves copying institutions from other countries.
Okay.
So, but understanding institutions such as like the marriage institution or the historic institution, not like institutions such as the Supreme Court, which we do have a Supreme Court as well as every country. But and the way that rights or social movements go in the United States, it's very similar historic wise with Mexico. I think it has to do with because we're both colonies originally.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
but a very marked difference. Like, yes, we're colonies and we're both federations. So I believe that government system is very similar. even
Okay.
if our law system is different, we have also a president, and then we have a senate, and how's the other name in English? Like
Chris?
two chambers, a legislative double chamber
Yeah, our Congress.
organization. Yes, a Congress divided in two chambers. We also have
Hmm.
that. We have the same division of power that comes from the French theory, which is a three division of power in legislative, executive, and judicial.
Okay.
So we have a very similar structure. However, one of the biggest difference I would say we have, which makes us completely different states, is how the federation was created and how our constitutions are written. So we have the same values essentially within the Constitution of human rights, equality, freedom, all that aspect. But for example, the US Constitution is very small compared to the Mexican one.
Really?
So the Mexican Constitution has over 100 articles, and it's very specific. That's why it's very constantly reformed. However, the American Constitution is very general and smaller, so
Yeah.
it has amendments, but
Hmm.
very specific and punctual, generalized amendments that
Hmm.
allow your judicial power to interpret. Whereas
Yes.
we have very
I see that.
specific and marked rules of what the government can and cannot do, which are constantly being reformed. So that marks a very big difference. And also the fact that, for example, in the United States, you were originally 13 colonies that
Hmm.
decided to come together in a union, and
Hmm.
Mexico was a whole Nueva España that decided to divide itself into different federations.
Okay.
So it's
Learn
like an
yourself
inverse
something.
process.
I am learning a lot today. But that is definitely one thing I see, especially going on around right now up here, is like laws will be, or laws that are in place. There's, this group, there's a group of people that are like, what's the law? You got to follow it. And yes, I mean, technically that's true. I understand law's a law. Cool. But then you got the other folks that are like, well, that law is wrong, like it's immoral, unethical. And that's true too. Like, I'm not going to go into specifics, but pretty sure it's not hard for you to figure out what I'm talking about here.
Yes.
You know, and like you just said, we have a lot of amendments in ours, and you guys, you said y'all reform yours every now and then as well. And that's how it happened. That's how it, like, nothing, no law from 100 years ago really stands the time in modern history. We always like, whoa, that doesn't make any sense. No, let's get rid of that. We change it up, we adopt it, modernize it, and there's definitely, I'm sure it's going to constantly be a thing, especially as time goes on. We're gonna grow as
It's
a
constantly
country, as a world.
changing.
It's constantly changing, but because what's currently a law is a law. You got those people that you got to follow. You got to do this. You got to do that. But what that is insanely unethical, immoral, and way backwards. And it will only benefit the country and everyone as a whole if you would just, change it up a little bit, make it a
That's
little
actually
better.
a
There's
social
nothing wrong with
theory. That's a very interesting social theory that exists. I currently do not remember who said it, but it's basically the governing dictatorship of the deceased. So, how we live with the values and what was decided upon by our ancestors, right?
Yeah.
Like a
Yes.
constant dictatorship of what it was considered good and righteous before. For example, before in the United States, slavery was legal.
Yeah.
Mexico had slavery legalized for a very small amount of time compared to the United States, because actually Spain, while we were still a colony, made it illegal.
Hmm.
So when we became our own country, we already didn't have slavery.
Okay.
Whereas in the United States, when you became your own country, slavery was still legal, and so
Okay.
becomes this fighting between the federation and the union, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Over here, it did not happen like that. However, we did have a caste system, which was what I was explaining of the social differences according to whether you were
Yes.
born where, and which is
Hmm.
not very much a kind of it's more of an ethnic, socio-economical related kind of discrimination more than a race-based currently, because right now we do not have that distinction more than like white Mexican or indigenous person, but
Okay.
the majority of Mexicans are an in-between mix of both.
Mm-hmm.
So what we see is a very marked colorized difference between higher income communities, which are much light skinned, like much more light skinned than darker skinned communities that are suffering from injustices within a socio-economical system more ingrained and racialized than, for example, we would see in the United States. In the United States, it's more of a stereotype kind of thing, a violence kind of thing. The
Mm-hmm.
people that would assume that an African American or a black person is more likely to be violent when it's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
Over here, it's more assumed than a darker skinned person will be of a lower socio-economical standing point than could really be the case. So
Yeah.
those are kind of like the differences of how the countries, I believe, were made to come in itself. For example, I am from Monterrey. I'm very fair skinned. I'm very light skinned. Even though I have very curly hair, a lot of people have curly hair here, but there's also very blonde people, blue-eyed people. It's very
Yeah.
common in Monterrey to see very light skinned people. And it's also because we have this Jewish ascendancy. So it's usually assumed that people in here with fairer skin will fare off better, no, than other racial or ethnic groups. Whereas if you go further south, for example, Oaxaca or Yucatan, people have more indigenous traces because
Mm-hmm.
the colonial settlers didn't really go into those
Yeah.
areas. The communities grew by themselves. So there's a very difference in like a very marked different treatment, which is spoken about, but people tend to try to ignore.
Yeah.
Here, I think we still have a lot to go with that. That's why I think it's very inspiring for different groups in Mexico right now, seeing, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, right? That you have going on in the United States right now. Because it's fighting for what's fair, at least as I see it, and for justice. It's something very scary, for example, from a Mexican standpoint. And seeing, for example, we had all this huge violent period, right? In 2010, 2011, I remember having shoot down drills at school where we had to hide because the narco violence and the narco war was
Okay.
was a very big thing here. And people usually from the United States, they assume, like, they think of Mexico and they say, oh no, but it must be dangerous traveling to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And Mexicans actually fear a little when they go to the United States as well, because over there it's legal to carry weapons, and in here
Yeah.
it's not. So like
Yeah.
most weapons that people, like illegal groups here, have are actually obtained in the United States
Oh yeah.
by these
Oh yeah.
illegal groups, and they bring them over.
For
And
sure.
so that's kind of like the impression, like the inverse impression that people
Mm-hmm.
have. Like Mexicans believe going to the United States a little bit more dangerous, even though it's more safe because technically you can walk alone at night, but at the same time it's like stay away from a mall or a big area because there could be a shooting. When over
Yeah.
here, like when I think about all those aspects, for example, currently I'm on TikTok, right? I see a lot of TikToks, and most of my algorithm, because I speak English, and the algorithm kind of like it recommends things on what you interact. So I see a lot of American content on my feed, and you see all these kids talking about like the shooting drills or how they've experienced this sort of violence. And I remember my time in middle school and how much fear you feel at
Yeah.
that it's kind of like we are more similar than we're different,
Mm-hmm.
and people tend to just like see the differences when we're actually both coming from colonies, just very different aspects of a colony, because the British kingdom, kind of the British crown, had a different way to colonize than the Spanish crown, and we have different languages. But
Mm-hmm.
other than that, it's really the same history.
I mean, yeah, from what you're saying and what I've learned today so far, there are a lot more similarities than I ever thought of. That's for
Hmm.
sure. I'll definitely say that. A lot more similarities than I ever put together before. Um, yeah, I think in what you just said about, we'll see generally, Americans will see Mexico as dangerous and Catholic, tequila, that kind of stuff.
Like party, but like beware of the narcos.
Yeah. I think a good a piece of that definitely is, obviously I'm American. I mean, I think that's an arrogant aspect of America, is we'll look at another country, and because we grew up and all we hear is we're the best, we're the best, we're the best. And in a lot of cases, hey, we got money, we got, military, all that kind of stuff. All right, yeah, whatever, cool. So we'll look at other countries like, but they don't got this, they don't got that, they don't. We got it, we got it, we got it, we got it, and it's a blind eye and just straight arrogance sometimes that I think is really getting annoying for sure. And it seems like more people are noticing that nowadays, especially with, you talk about the Black Lives Matter, and people weren't really speaking up on issues like that. Like me, I'm from South Carolina. I'm from the South of America. Anyways, I, being white, I'd never experienced racism, like personally, but being in the South, I saw it plenty.
Mm-hmm.
And so.
And it's something everyone is aware is happening. Like in here, it happens as well. But nobody wants to talk about it because it's uncomfortable and it brings up delicate topics that people don't want to talk about but need to be talked about in order to fix them. I think that's one of the aspects why what I love about my career, like studying law, because basically it's talking about the difficult issues to talk about, right? Like it's what rules society. And what you were saying some time ago about some laws being fair or unfair is completely true. There is a thing as a legal law which was created with all its due process and was approved by the Congress, was approved by the Senate, was sealed by the president and published for people to know and follow. But then there's a thing such as a legitimate law, a law that is morally good, because having laws is not really a measure for morality. And people sometimes, I don't know if it's more like a social laziness we have as a culture, like we're allowed to do whatever is not forbidden to do. And if it's not explicitly forbidden because it's a difficult topic to discuss, or because it's generally forbidden in an aspect that if I do it subtly, I will get away with it. For example, discrimination and racism. That's obviously against both our constitutions. Both the Mexican and the American Constitution clearly state that there should be no discrimination. However, how we see all these microaggressions or how they come to be, they generate this large scale problem that technically is illegal, but you cannot really pinpoint, like if I sit on a bus and scutter away and grab my bag because someone I deem to be stereotypical or that I might fear for saying, for lack of a better word, that's a microaggression, and that's a way of showing that you do not actually believe you're both equal. And that is stated within our society. And sometimes we want to be blinded by it, because then people, for example, when we want to talk about privileges, right? Like all of these social movements have to do with the debate of whether you're privileged or not. And people tend to think that when people say that white people are privileged, for example, if I go to the United States, I would be considered a Latina. I would be considered white. However, in Mexico, I'm considered white because in here, there's no distinction between Latino and non-Latino because we're all Latinos, right? Okay. And because Latino is an ethnicity, not a race.
Correct.
So in here, I'm part of the privileged group. I go to private school, which is a very big privilege within the community. So saying that we have privileges as a community, as a white community, or as a higher income community, or as whatever level, doesn't say that our life is easy. It just says that it isn't made harder because of natural aspects within ourselves. So it's not to say that we don't have issues or that we don't have problems that we can overcome. It's to say that those problems we have, it's not because of our skin color. It's not because of where we were born. It's not because for being a man or a woman, for example, because there's also the issue with gender discrimination. So it's a lot of complex issues piling up within very mixed communities, such as the American community and the Mexican community, where we have all these flourishes of cultures, sometimes ingrained, sometimes very visible, sometimes not as visible, such as the Jewish community in Monterrey, which is
Yeah.
rarely spoken of, but
Mhm.
that affect how we socially work as a community.
I like that. I like that. Well, one thing for sure, I don't want we're almost going on an hour here. I enjoyed the hell out of this talk.
Me too.
If you ever, I'm just gonna, if you ever want to get on and do another one and more talk about laws and the differences and whatnot, I'd be 100% down for that. Because that's one thing I noticed when I started my podcast. It was just for fun, just to talk random crazy stuff, and then everything happened up here, and I was like, I gotta do something. You know, I can't do a lot, but I gotta do what I can do. So it started to lean more in trying to make a change as best I could. But then I got into this whole other cultural stuff, and I was like, this is really really fun. Um, but yeah, if you'd be down at some point to get on and continue this talk, that'd be great.
I'd love to anytime.
All right. Well, I'll give you the last word. If you want to say any other thing to anybody out there, floor is
Well,
yours.
pretty much to just don't believe stereotypes as a whole.
Okay.
Communities are very diverse. Not all Mexicans are party margarita sombrero. And that's not like, yes, it's an aspect of Mexican culture,
Yes.
but it's not all of the Mexican culture. We're a very mixed group. We're a very diverse group. In general, it's all very different. If you go to Cancun, you still have a lot to learn about
Yeah.
Mexico. Um, we have more similarities than we have differences with the United States, even
Mhm.
if we neither of us would like to admit it. And pretty much it's that, just learning that our differences don't have to make us that much different. It just makes
True.
us unique in a very particular way, and within more diversity, and the more we know about our histories, our cultures, how our societies work as a whole, and why they work that way, and how we came to be how we are,
Mhm.
we can make a better community, understanding the values that we have hold for centuries pretty much, and why we hold them.
Yeah, I think with definitely because, like you just said, not all Mexicans are party, tequila, Cancun, and all that kind of stuff. Not all Americans are arrogant and me. You know,
Exactly.
I think one thing that everyone should strive to be is definitely more open minded, like you said, to other people, other cultures, other aspects of what you don't have to agree with whatever that is, but I mean, as
Learn
long
to
as
live
it's
with our differences.
exactly, there's no reason to hate people for stuff like that. It's never made any sense, and it's not going to help anybody in the long run. Whether you like it or not, we are in this together. Um, but I appreciate you, Isabella. I'm gonna get with you after this, and anything you want me to link in the description will be down there. Are you currently like a lawyer, or are you still studying?
I'm still studying. I would be the equivalent on what the United States is known as a paralegal, but it's more like an
Okay.
internship because
Okay.
I can exercise. I just cannot go to a court, for example. Like, I
All
cannot
right.
stand in front of a court, but I have studying law in Mexico. It's a 4.5 year career, kind of going to college. Like, it would
Mhm.
be kind of the equivalent.
Yeah.
So I'm finishing up my fourth year, pretty much.
Okay.
Um, so I've already worked most of my studies, if you haven't realized by now, has been on international law. And
Okay. Yep.
so
Seems like it.
it's very I have worked mostly in companies seeing international deals and how these cultures have to work together to understand different legal systems and to make it work in Mexico.
Makes sense.
So yeah. I do practice. I'm currently in a company, but actually tomorrow is my last day in that company, and I'm gonna start working in the judicial power starting this Thursday. So
All right. Cool. Well, if any incoming Mexican company or international company goes to Monterey, look up Isabella. She'll get you right. I appreciate it.
Gladly. Thank you very much for having me here.
All right, you take care.
You too.